So we start talking about Alzheimer's. This is just to kind of give you an idea, and I have a feeling that most of you have this idea already of what this means. Alzheimer's affects a lot of people, and we're going to talk about the United States, but it's really a worldwide issue. First question is, and you don't have to answer this, just think in your mind, how many people do you think in the U.S. today have Alzheimer's disease? Don't answer me. Don't raise your hand. Don't even blurt it out, because I'm going to tell you. You don't have to know, guess, or whatever. But the answer is, it's more than 6 million people in the United States. And the numbers that are bandied about right now today is it's somewhere around 6.7 million. And the expectation is by 2030, it'll be closer to 7 million people in the United States have active Alzheimer's disease. And that number keeps growing, as you just heard. An almost bigger issue is, and I'm going to guess that a number of you have had experience with this, is how many unpaid, let me see if I say this correctly here, how many people, Americans in this case, provide unpaid care for people who have Alzheimer's or dementia? And the answer is going to be, it's on that screen, and again, don't tell me what you think it is, but I'm going to tell you what the real answer is. It's over 11 million, it's closer to 12 million people right now are providing care for somebody with Alzheimer's, and it's unpaid care. So we're not talking about people that are even in nursing homes or memory care facilities, things like that. So that just gives you an idea of the scale and the importance of this. There will not be a quiz on that number later. You can just know that it's an important deal. So I'm going to just make a guess. Many of you, myself included not too long ago, thought Alzheimer's and dementia were the same thing. And the answer is they're not. Now, the real answer to that question is, what's the difference? And the difference is that all Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, but not all dementia is a form of Alzheimer's. Does that make sense? So it's like talking about cancer, for example. I mean, all cancers are not, or all lung cancer is not all cancer. But all cancer encompasses all the other types of cancer when we say that. I hope I said that somewhat clearly. So anyway, dementia is the umbrella term that we use for all forms of loss of memory, thinking abilities, severe enough to interfere with daily life. There we go. We're going to spend a couple minutes about how Alzheimer's specifically affects the brain. I don't know about you, that's not really the way a brain looks, but it's kind of a pretty picture. I knew that was going to happen. That's all right. We can pass right through that. So that was Dr. Mary Carrillo. She's really one of the head doctors in the entire Alzheimer's Association. And she was going to tell, pardon me, one moment. I went too far. On the other hand, I may have gone way too far in the other direction. Okay, well, you're going to have to give me a moment here. But Dr. Carrillo was going to talk about the brain effects of Alzheimer's, or the specific disorder that happens within the brain that relates to Alzheimer's. And as I get to this slide, I can bring you up to speed here. Whoops, I'm already going too fast. Apparently, I'm not very skilled with using my remote here. So the brain effects in Alzheimer's are very clearly two things they're talked about, and people talk about, and you may have heard about plaques and tangles. All right, so there's something called amyloid that gets coalesced in the brain and forms these plaques around nerve cells, causes them to become sick and die. There's something else called tau particles that create the tangles, there we go, the tangles in the brain that are actually inside the nerve cells and cause destruction of the cells from inside. So there's two pieces that we look at when we look at Alzheimer's, and these things are really, actually were first described by, guess what, a guy named Dr. Alzheimer about 100 years ago. And he discovered them, unfortunately, not with PET scans, but with autopsies. So the same is true today, but the PET scans are the defining way to really diagnose Alzheimer's disease today. Now, the interesting feature of that is, and the troublesome feature of it is, that you can have these plaques and tangles. It doesn't mean you have Alzheimer's disease. And plenty of people have had PET scans and been found to not have any signs of Alzheimer's, for example. but it's almost always there if you do have the illness. Does that make some sense? It doesn't prove you've got it. It doesn't mean you have to have it. The other feature of this, and I think I'm going to get to it here in not too long, is that these plaques and tangles tend to show up before the symptoms start to show up. So that gives us a little bit of an idea about how we might track this disease maybe even before it shows up. That's really all in kind of a research milieu right now anyway. So my favorite thing to talk about, see if I've got this in the right order here, is risk factors. So the question is, what are the odds that Roberta is going to get Alzheimer's disease? I hope you don't have it now. Do you have it now? No. You don't remember? Okay. That's kind of a bad joke, but I'm glad you laughed. Thank you. So anyway, so risk factors for disease. So I have to spend just a moment talking about risk, because everything we know, and this is everything we knew when I was in medicine taking care of little babies, neonates, all of our science was based on comparison. Okay, so we take a child, for example, that has this illness, or this disorder, or this weakness, and we give them something, new medicine, a different kind of nutrition, this or that, and try to compare them to other children. And how do we decide if it works better or doesn't work, or if it's even harmful? And this is, anytime there's a scientific paper that comes out, this is the comparison in human beings. Everything that's done in human beings is that imperfect. So the best way to do it is to try to give one shot of something to one person and give nothing to the other person who has the same issue, and see what happens. Well, risk factors tell us this. Risk factors tell us the same thing we learned about COVID, for example. So if you get this shot, for example, if you get an immunization for COVID, how many people, do you know how many people who got an immunization for COVID got COVID? I don't. But it's a much lower number than the people who didn't get an immunization. All right, let's just say that. So what does that mean? Well, your risk factor then for getting COVID, if you have an immunization, is much lower than your risk for getting COVID if you don't have the immunization. That's all the immunizations are based on. Large bunches of people get the immunization compared to people who either refused or just didn't get it, and then they look at what were their side effects, this and that. I hope that makes sense. The same thing goes on with all the Alzheimer's information, and it's very difficult sometimes to tease out how powerful a different form of therapy is, or how powerful a risk is. Okay? I see a question rising over here. Yes? No? Oh, go ahead.
So are you talking about Alzheimer's at early onset? Are you leaving that separate? Or are you talking about Alzheimer's in general?
I'm talking about Alzheimer's in general. So the question was, am I talking about Alzheimer's at the more severe end, or versus the early end, versus before maybe you even have it? And this really speaks to before you have it. Okay, risk factors. The risk of getting Alzheimer's, of acquiring Alzheimer's or developing Alzheimer's, is what I'm talking about. Okay, that's the risk factor. So why do I want to spend time on that? Well, the easy answer is we don't have a treatment for it once you have it. You can just ignore that there's really any treatment for it. There's no cure. There might be some therapies and some that might be in the horizon that might help with it. And as we get into the risk factors, and then the part that I talk about healthy living, healthy for brain and body, we'll talk about impacts that we may or may not be able to have on those so-called risk factors. So, yes?
While you're at this point, is there anything historically that tells us that there's more Alzheimer's today than there was 50 years ago, or we just didn't know about it, or thought it was just people getting old?
Yeah, good question. And the answer is multi-pronged. So yes, living longer, all right, is one aspect to that. In fact, the best data I can tell you about that is that, and we're going to get into this when we get a little bit more into some of the risk factors and even how we can manage that. But you know, the cardiologists for more than 20 years have been touting certain interventions. Cholesterol control, for example, exercise, dietary things, and we've seen the rate, meaning the incidence, for a certain population of death from cardiac disease going down over that last 20 years. Well, concurrently with that, we've seen the rate of Alzheimer's going up. And as we talk about, I'm going to stop right there because I'm going to go to the next set of risk factors that will speak to that exactly. No, I went the wrong way. Nobody heard that, right? So there's a whole array of risk factors, but I try to break them down into a couple of categories. Just two categories. One is risk factors that are relatively fixed, or risk factors you cannot have an impact on. Those three on the screen there. For example, you can't have an impact on your age, right? Can't change that. In fact, the only way to change it is a bad way to change it. You don't want that to happen. So as we get older, the risk of Alzheimer's goes up. We can't do anything about that. Family history. Interesting enough, the risk for Alzheimer's goes up if you have a primary member of your family that also has or had Alzheimer's. So parents or a sibling. If any of them have Alzheimer's, the risk goes up.
Is that true for dementia too, in general?
I can't speak to dementia, in all honesty. Now, Alzheimer's actually accounts for 2/3 of all dementia, so that's part of why we speak about them sometimes, interchangeably. But so I can't speak to the other forms of dementia. Many of the other forms of dementia have a different medical cause that's not really affiliated with these factors here. Some of them are affiliated with genetic disorders. Okay, so family history. That's the only family history one that's really clear is that marker of a parent or a sibling that have the illness raises your risk. Genetics. So genetics is an interesting field. We're beginning to learn more and more about genetic basis for all sorts of diseases, but one of them is Alzheimer's disease. And there's a lot of genetic, what we call markers out there that are under study. The one that we know the most about right now is something called, APOE, apoprotein E. Excuse me. So APOE, all caps, all right? And there's a couple of what we call alleles or types of this gene, APOE. And the ones that we worry about are number 3 and number 4. Not worry about, but ones that we know most about are number 3 and number 4. So everybody carries 2 parts to that gene, or 2 what we call alleles, 2 pieces, okay? So if you have this APOE number 3 gene, there's no change in your risk at all. Your risk is just whatever it already is, okay? It goes up with your age, relative to your family history, and maybe some other factors. If you have this APOE number 4, APOE4, then your risk doubles. If you have one of those genes, your risk doubles. So if your risk is, pick a number, but some people say the risk is 2% at age 65. 2% of people at age 65 will have it now, 2%, and it goes up by, we'll show you in a minute here. The rate of Alzheimer's goes up, or the presence of Alzheimer's goes up with age, of course, right? So just as a reference, it goes up, it doubles about every 5 years. If you have this APOE number 4, your risk doubles immediately. So it's twice what it would be if you didn't have it, say at 65. Hope that makes sense. And that's for the rest of your life. It goes up. It's double of what it would have been otherwise. Okay? Now this is just risk factor. This doesn't mean you're going to get it. If you have 2 of these, which you can have, this is typically a much more different and aggressive kind of illness, but it's the same Alzheimer's. What I mean by that is it shows up earlier and it is much more aggressive and, how should I say, faster acting. It moves a lot faster. It's a very serious form of the illness. Fortunately, the APOE number 4 gene is uncommon to rare. That said, here's my story. I told you I'd give you little bits and pieces as we go along. So that was about a year ago, I guess, as I got further along in this journey of mine through the last third of my life and understanding Alzheimer's disease, I found and heard that, wow, my mother had Alzheimer's disease. No, that doesn't sound so good. Wow, now I'm 65. Okay, these are issues, and as I'll talk about in a minute, there may be something we can do about some of these risk factors. But I really wanted to find out more, and I wanted to know if is there something I can do, and I wanted to find out if I had that gene. So you can go get that blood test for APOE, okay? And you have to go get your doctor to do it. They'll send it out. I don't know that anybody pays for it, so it might be out of your pocket. But the question is, do you want to know? And my answer to that was, yes, I want to know. And I wanted to know because I wanted to know if there was something I can do that it would inspire me. As we get into things that we can potentially do, I'll explain to you how that would inspire me. But I have one of those genes. Did I just say that already? I have one of those genes. So my risk is double, plus the risk of, I have a family history. So my risk is theoretically relatively high compared to just the average population. Okay? So that inspires me, as you might well imagine. But let's talk about the other risk factors then. So there are a few other risk factors that we can do very little about. Black Americans, are twice as likely as white Americans to have Alzheimer's disease. Hispanic Americans are 1.5 times as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. And women have a higher rate of having Alzheimer's disease also. It's almost twice as much as men in general. Not quite, but it's higher. So now there's a little bit of a hedge on that. Sorry guys, women live longer, and some of that because Alzheimer's is an age-related disease. That's a certain percentage of that is because women live longer. They're gonna have this opportunity to develop the disease more. But that's not the entire story. It doesn't just fit the numbers of the statistics. All right, so those are what I call, and they're not fixed, but I call non-negotiables or non-modifiable risk factors. But there are some risk factors that now we're going to talk about, and this is the best and maybe the most entertaining, interesting part of the talk today about modifiable risk factors. So let's talk about that. So I'll set that down. I mentioned a little bit about cardiovascular disease and how as cardiovascular disease, or deaths from cardiovascular disease has gone down, more people have developed Alzheimer's on average. The interesting feature though is that if you look at as the cardiovascular disease has gone down, the incidence of Alzheimer's has also gone down. So how does that make sense? Well, the number of patients with Alzheimer's has gone up, but the population we're drawing from, i.e. this room and more, but has grown. We're all part of the boomer generation. You know, the greatest number of people of any generation in our history or our past. And because the number of boomers is so high, the number of patients with Alzheimer's has been going up, while the incidence, meaning the percent of boomers who are getting Alzheimer's, has been trickling down also. Just like the disease, it's just like the heart disease. Now, the second piece to that particular piece is heart disease is an earlier killer. Alzheimer's does affect people later. So if you may still be developing Alzheimer's even though you don't have the cardiac disease piece to it. I hope that makes some sense. These different illnesses up here also raise your risk for Alzheimer's disease. The good news is treating them brings it right back down to normal. All right, so even though I'm biased and I say go see your doctor, go see your doctor. Hypertension, diabetes, midlife obesity, and good cholesterol versus bad cholesterol. I'm going to bet that everybody here has heard about their good cholesterol versus their bad cholesterol, because I don't need to explain that today. You just have to ask your doctor, because that's what we're doing now. Anyway, so those things are like that. So those are medically available treatments or things that we can do to improve our risk factors. All right, so if you have one of these things, if you have hypertension, oh, guess what? So do I. If you have bad cholesterol, it's elevated. I used to, I don't anymore. Those are things that might inspire you to go into that treatment, to get treated, but you can. So I'm on a medicine for my hypertension. I'm on a statin for my high cholesterol. How about that? And by the way, my hypertension's under good control too. So there. I know y'all were worried, weren't you? No. Okay, so this is really a list of things that are important, and I guess we'll call them lifestyle factors that also clearly have an impact on your risk for Alzheimer's disease. So I'll put that list up there, and I'm going to talk about each one of them in some greater detail. And I have a feeling there'll probably be plenty of questions about it, but we can answer those questions as we go along. But I'm going to talk about each of these in great detail. The one I'm not going to talk about is being smoke-free. That's almost a no-brainer. All right? Just smoking is bad. If you're still smoking, I can't do much for you. You don't have to listen to me. You can just stop smoking. Okay, so this is kind of in no particular order, but sleep is important. Interesting how they've actually studied sleep and the progression of Alzheimer's and what sleep might do if you're either developing or have not yet developed Alzheimer's disease. We don't think of sleep as anything more than rest, but sleep is when your body repairs itself. It heals all the little traumas that go on during the day, and interestingly enough, all these things that go on with Alzheimer's are going on in little bits every day. People that don't sleep very much, unfortunately, that was me again for about 35 years. It was all work related, thank you. But sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night seems to be the key factor. Good sleep, all right? Sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, not so good, all right? So that's all I'm going to say about that, but it clearly has an impact on memory and thinking if your sleeping is poor.
Did you say 7 hours?
7 to 8 hours.
7 to 8.
Yep.
Thank you.
This is a little bit harder topic to kind of, I guess, isolate or bear down on, but your mental health is an issue. I'm going to talk a little bit, just for a second, about attitude. If you think your life is bad, that's not so good for your longevity. If you think your life is great or you enjoy your days, your longevity and your risk for Alzheimer's get better. Okay? Symptoms of anxiety and depression are really troublesome partners there. And it's, I can share with you that both my parents and my father, who passed away just a year ago, he developed dementia much later in his life, and he was almost 90 years old before he had any signs or symptoms of it. But he went through periods of anxiety and depression in his later years, and my mother did too. They got some help with some medications, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the other things that help our health, that also help decrease or prevent the symptoms of depression and anxiety. So, okay, that's. So I'm a big fan of this, not playing soccer in my backyard with one of the neighborhood children, but exercise. That's what this is all about. And I'm going to also guess that most people in the room have read or heard you need to take so many steps a day, 7,000, 10,000, some number of what that is, right? And guess what? That's true. That was always true for cardiovascular disease, but it's also true for Alzheimer's. So if you're an exerciser, that's in your favor. Regular exercise. And we can talk about how much is enough. And in all honesty, if we were all just sitting here 24 hours a day, getting up and walking for 20 minutes a day, 4 or 5 times a week, would make a big difference. But the standard teaching is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, regular walking, maybe a couple of days of also very brisk walking, and we'll talk also about some other exercises that might be fun, like dance, for example, or picking up a new sport. Anybody here play pickleball? I might have thought it'd be more. Okay, well, good for you. I play too, by the way. So picking up an activity that keeps you busy like that, 30, 40 minutes, 4 or 5 times a week, makes a big difference. And if you're already doing that, increasing that activity, even higher levels of activity. So if you like to cycle or swim, adding that into your workouts or adding that into your day, big factors, it helps. And I can give you some numbers about how it lowers the risk by some percentage. those numbers are relatively meaningless, but they're important because they are true. And the people that live the longest, and might refer periodically to places in the world called blue zones, where people in communities that are relatively isolated, their community average, they have the highest number of people in the world, percentage of people in the world that live to be over 100, and in those communities, almost none have Alzheimer's disease. So why is that? Well, one of the things, that common features they found in those communities is that everybody exercises. Everybody. They exercise, and they don't have to be going to the gym and lifting big weights or getting on the treadmill and running hard for 40 minutes or something like that. The exercises could be as much as a lady who was in Italy, her church, she lived at the bottom of the hill, her church was at the top of the hill, every day she'd walk up there and go to church. That was her main form of exercise. She was 102 at the time they interviewed her. Others, I think in Okinawa, maybe Singapore, I can't remember, Okinawa, the exercise was gardening, for example. And I'm not a fan of getting down on my knees very often, but it works. It works. It was exercise, getting up and out, fresh air, that sort of stuff. So that's where we're at. Now, I'm going to add a maybe a request, you might call it, for another form of exercise, which is for your strength. Now, walking is great. It helps your cardiovascular status. It helps you, helps you to fend off Alzheimer's and other diseases, actually. But one of the key features for longevity is your balance and your ability to get yourself up off the floor if you fall, or to fall and not hurt yourself, right? So how do you prevent that? Well, walking is good, but strength building is better. And I'm here to tell you for sure that even if you've never done an exercise in your life, using any kind of free weights or body weight exercise or something like that, you can even now still get stronger. If you're in your 80s, and we've done these tests, not me actually, but or not yet, I might do one day, but that you can, by regimented exercises, using single weights, dumbbells, or even chair exercises. I don't know if you all have heard about chair exercises at all or not, but exercises that build up the strength of your arms as well as your legs. So just put that in your repertoire there. You get bored with what you're doing sometimes, say, I'm tired of walking. Go to the gym or go get a couple of 5-pound barbells and walk with those barbells instead. It helps with your balance. Yes?
Church offers yoga.
Yep.
Did you all hear that? The church offers yoga?
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Tuesdays and Fridays.
There you go. We didn't talk about yoga, but yoga is perfect. Yoga and something else called Tai Chi, if you ever all have heard about either of those. Tai Chi is a slow form of karate, really, but it's great for balance, leverage. Yoga, the same thing. So I'm an advocate for all those things. Any questions along that? Any further comments? Oh, you're all okay.
I have a question. It
Yes.
goes back to your question when you said check for genetics for the Alzheimer's gene.
Yes.
In 23andMe, they automatically check for that. Do you know if they check for the number 3, number 4? Do you know anything about that?
I don't really know anything about that, but there's no point in checking for this APOE unless you're checking 3 and 4. And I don't think you even get those separately. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I mean, if somebody checks for the APOE gene, they'll check for those 2 types.
Okay, so if they say they're checking for Alzheimer's, then they have to check for.
That would be the one they're checking for now.
Okay,
Right.
they give you that option to
Mhm.
get the results or not to
Okay.
get the results if
Yeah.
you don't want it or not want it.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know anything about 23andMe. I'd be careful about them saying they're checking for Alzheimer's.
No, they don't say that.
Okay.
They say they found a gene, it may mean you are susceptible to.
There you go. Okay.
You're at a higher risk, but not necessarily.
Okay, very good. Did you all kind of hear that?
No.
All right. I don't know your name, so I'm just going to paraphrase what you're saying. But the question was, 23andMe has an option of checking for the Alzheimer's gene, so to speak. And the way that they put this is it doesn't check for Alzheimer's exactly, but it checks for your susceptibility, which is exactly really it should be. And I haven't looked at this exactly, but it should be exactly what I was telling you about the APOE genes numbers 3 and 4. So remember that if you have two codes of number 3, you have a normal risk. If you have one with a number 4, your risk or susceptibility, as they'll call it, goes up. Okay? Other questions? All right. Now, that's a good point to talk about those things. So if you have, remember the first set of factors I talked about: age, family, risk, and genetics. And then I talked about, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, women. Those are all sort of non-modifiable risk factors. Now, what is interesting now is to say, these things that I'm showing you here right now, that I call modifiable risk factors, they modify your risk regardless of whether you have those fixed factors in place. Does that sort of make sense? So your risk is never fixed. It's never fixed. Your risk is what it is, and you can adjust it. It may be higher because of things that, for example, I'm born with, a gene or something like that, or you have family members that have it, but you can still modify that risk. Okay? Is that clear? Yes, question?
Does living alone with not a lot of interaction with other people, does that increase your chances of this? Sure.
The short answer is yes, and we're about to get to that. So, and it's a very short story, but we're going to get right to that. Yes.
What was the question?
Oh. Couldn't hear me? The question was, does living alone change your risk, or living in isolation, as it's sometimes talked about, does that affect your risk, make your risk worse, for example, for Alzheimer's? And the short answer is yes. Okay? So social isolation is a negative. Socialization, like what you're doing all now, is a positive, meaning it lowers your risk. Okay? That's about all I have to say about it, actually.
So if you can't get a husband, get a dog.
I'd say get a dog anyway, but that's me. I have 5 of them, so and besides my wife, that's it. I think so. That's a good one. I like that. Get a dog. And in all honesty, I think dogs are therapeutic like that. I mean, that's my personal belief, because I don't know. They do challenge you mentally. They challenge you in a lot of ways, but they're good for getting you out, getting some exercise. Take your dog for a walk. That counts, right? You got a warm body nearby. Heck, I talk to my dogs all the time. Now, the day when I start hearing them talk back to me, then I might need some assistance. But that's okay. Well, there you go. It was next. Be socially active. All right, social engagement. Is associated with living longer with fewer disabilities. Those who feel well connected tend to make healthier choices in other areas. So that's part of that also. All right? So that was a good and timely question. Thank you. So part of the socialization is not just being around with people, but there's a part of this that intellectual engagement, I guess we'll call it. Challenging your brain. They like to call it cognitive engagement. It's the same thing. But so thinking, but more importantly, learning new things actually doesn't just challenge your brain, but it makes your brain stronger. And there are some studies that have actually looked at, well, I talked about the things you see in the brain, the plaques and tangles, right? And how that destroys the brain. Your brain actually shrinks and gets smaller. There's an area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is primarily part of the memory area. And we can measure that, imagine that. And we can see that gets smaller as Alzheimer's progresses. And there's other areas of the brain that are affected also. It's not just the hippocampus, but it gets smaller. Now, what we can do and have seen is some studies, and there are small numbers, but people that learn new skills, are intellectually active, challenged, people that go out and learn how to talk to you about Alzheimer's, we're hoping, learn new skills and that sort of stuff, don't have the same type of deterioration over time. So if you pick 2 groups, neither one of them has Alzheimer's yet, and you follow them for 10 years, and one group has been learning new things all along, you'll find at the end of that 10 years that their hippocampus is either less atrophied or just plain larger. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes.
bigger brain.
Brain gains, would that be considered?
Yeah, I think so. It's not, brain games have not exactly been studied, even though, I don't know, you might be on the same thing that I was on for a while. I can't remember what it was called now, but you can go and do these brain skill tests and things like that.
Yeah.
And they tout that it makes a difference. And it might in some ways. It probably, the skills that they're having you work on might actually be able to be maintained. So, but I can't tell you for sure exactly how much that does. There was some.
But it won't hurt.
It won't hurt. No, it won't hurt at all. In fact, it may help in some ways that you wouldn't have expected to necessarily look for. We'll talk about some of the things that are in when we get to the 10 signs, about how some of those things may be, some of those kind of tests might be a factor that help ameliorate some of those things as well, if that makes some sense. But learning new skills, taking on a challenging task, engaging in ongoing learning. The one that I should say I like the least, because I could never do it, was learn a new language. Yeah, there was a couple chuckles out there. I get that, because when I saw that, oh yeah, go learn a new language. I couldn't learn one when I was 25. I don't know what I'm going to do about it now. So anyway, but that said, and that's me, but that's the kind of general thing you can talk about. Actually, and one of the best ones I heard, I don't think, okay. So we talked about exercise, right? And and we did talk about, what did we talk about? We talked about yoga a little bit. I mentioned pickleball. And did we say something about dance? Did I say that?
Yeah.
I did, okay. Well, I said that because of this fascinating study. It was done in Germany, and it really was with a reasonable number of people. I think there were 30 people that had high risk, and some had the very earliest stage of Alzheimer's disease. And they went to a school and learned how to dance. And this was mostly ballroom dancing, but not all exclusively, right? So they measured after, I think it was 18 months, so a year and a half, and found that they had not lost any of their cognitive ability compared to a group that had the exact same risk factors that had showed some measurable declines. And we haven't talked about how we measure those declines, but there are some mental acuity or mental memory tests, some cognitive learning skills tests that are out there that trained people can use to kind of measure these things. And if you do them in sequence on one person, they have some validity, right? So anyway, but this group that learned how to dance saw that their cognitive abilities were the same, or in some cases even better. Now, that doesn't say that Alzheimer's was getting better necessarily, but they at least maintained what they had going on there. And why is that? Well, because it took two of the factors here, maybe three of them, that we're talking about. One, it challenged your brain. Two, it challenged your body, right? Challenge your body, exercise. And three, it was a very social endeavor, right? Gets people out and gets you to meet and talk with other people, something like that. So it was kind of fascinating. Now, I'm a terrible dancer. I'd have a hard time doing that. But maybe I should, because, like I said, not only can you get stronger, you can get better. I didn't pick up pickleball until about 2 years ago. And I was pretty good. So I was just being very humble about it. Right?
We're talking about how it sets up the orthopedist business by 50% also.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people that they bought new boats and even had additions on their house. Afterwards, I'll tell you about my woes, but it's not really because of pickleball. I was one of these lifelong exercisers, tennis and this and that, and I kind of wore myself down. Okay, so this is more about active mind, mentally stimulating activity. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something specific, but those things can only help. And some sort of formal education kinds of things also, I think, are in that same category. What else we got here? Okay, so I talked about exercise. That's one of my favorite things that can impact on your risk for Alzheimer's. The second, really, in my opinion, and maybe a lot of other opinions, is how you eat and what you eat. Not so much how much, but it's what. So, and I'm going to guess again here, because you're all, y'all are pretty educated in here, so I don't know if I'm really teaching anything or not, but the Mediterranean, you've probably heard about the Mediterranean diet, or some form of that, the MIND diet or the DASH diet. These are all diets that do this. They're basically fruits and vegetables. I think I was talking to Josh earlier or something, or sitting next to Josh talking about my horrible diet. And what is that? What are we talking about, Alex? Well, so there are things that are diets that seem to have an impact on the risk for Alzheimer's. I mentioned just briefly about something called blue zones. There's 6 places in the world that have the most centenarians. Does everybody know what that is? People living over 100? Oh, you would, okay. So people living over 100. And in all those centers, pretty much without exception, they eat one of these kinds of diets. So is that the cause of their longevity, the cause of their lowering risk or lower incidence, I should say, of Alzheimer's disease? Well, it's an association. Does it cause it? I don't know, but it's an association. So what is that? Well, the key elements here are like this. Fruits and vegetables. And I told people at my table beforehand how I was not a vegetable eater, certainly not a vegetarian, but not a vegetable eater for most of my life. Just couldn't find anything I liked enough to eat, right? Sorry, Mom. And the fruits were fine. I didn't eat a whole lot of nuts, beans, and whole grains. Way too much white bread, so to speak. I ate some meats, not a whole lot of fish and poultry. After I got my my genetics done and had my risk factors, I said, wow, this is really starting to bother me. I think I need to pay attention to this because I'm just not going to ignore this, and then all of a sudden one day I'm going to go, oh, too late. Because it's not too late. That's the first point right there. It's not too late. So I found vegetables, thank goodness for my wife, who just helped me find things that I could. Nobody's going to eat things they don't like, right? I mean, it just takes the joy out of life. So I found in some ways I could do that. Fruits, added a lot of fruits to my diet. I started making a lot of smoothies. I don't know how much. Just raise your hand. Who in here you drink smoothies? A smoothie almost every day. Yeah. So, and that's a good way to just get these things in your diet that you wouldn't maybe necessarily normally eat for a day. But so nuts, beans, whole grains, fish and poultry. I became a big fish fan in particular. Salmon and tuna. Salmon might be the best food out there for all sorts of reasons, but there you go. Healthier fats. And I discovered, and this was almost by accident, that added sugars in your diet. So if you look at you get a box of something, cereal. Oh God, cereal is the worst. But we'll just pick cereal because what did I grow up on for breakfast every day until I was, I don't know, until a few years ago maybe? Cereal, right? So cereal has tons of added sugars. And it's added sugars, not just sugar, but it's added sugars. So there's lots of carbohydrates that are good for you, but the added sugars, if you look at a box that says added sugars on there, you might just want to throw it away. And why is that? Well, it does raise your risk of Alzheimer's disease. For me, it actually it's a very powerful inflammatory, which means that it raises your risk or severity of your arthritis. And see me walking around here, you might not know it, but my arthritis is a mess. So it's important from that standpoint. But I discovered that it's also important in terms of lowering your risk for Alzheimer's to have a diet that's low in added sugars. If you've got diabetes, guess what? It's also helpful for that. Okay, salt's also bad, particularly if you have hypertension. Well, gee whiz, I got everything. No. Yes, go ahead.
So I think it was 60 Minutes that I saw that really emphasized doing a vegetarian or vegan diet for Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you were.
Yeah, it was on.
About that.
Was this Sanjay Gupta
Yeah.
led discussion? All right. So yes, I saw that, and it was actually he was presenting the story of a research study done by a guy named Dean Ornish, I think is his last name. So and it was a fascinating story, and actually I read the study too, which is even more fascinating. But the vegan, so what? Just for everybody else's understanding here, there was a documentary on, it was on CNN, and now it's actually on Max, I think, if you want to find it. And it was, oh, I'm sorry, I actually wrote it down, but it's called. But it was led by Sanjay Gupta. Oh, I have it here. Pardon me one moment while I get my reference. My coffee too. Do you think I need coffee? I seem to move around a lot.
Here.
I'll find it here soon. You know, I promise you I wrote it down, and then I promise you that I lost it. I forgot where it is. Imagine that. Oh, no, it was called The Last Alzheimer's Patient. And it was led by Sanjay Gupta, who's the medical doctor for CNN, something like that. It was a fascinating documentary. And it was specifically focused on a research study done by a guy named Dean Ornish. I think he started it in San Francisco and then it spread to other places. But what he did was, and he took a small group of patients, 50 patients, divided them into two groups. Remember he talked about doing this for one and not doing this for the other? Well, he did something more than that. He took all of these risk factors, or these modifiable risk factors, and he addressed them. All right, so he took a group of people and they all had, and we'll talk about what this means in a minute, but they had either what's called mild cognitive impairment, which is sort of a pre-Alzheimer's, or the first stage maybe, or in the first stage of Alzheimer's. So you had to have early disease. He took them, and he took one group, and he changed their diet. Strictly that. I think you're right. I don't think there was any meat in it at all. I thought there was seafood in it, but I'm not sure. But he did that. They had directed exercise. So they had some by a physical therapist. They had people come in and do their exercise in groups, but they had to do this exercise. The people that signed up for this, all right. There was walking. There were strength exercises involved in it. So the exercise, the diet. Believe it or not, they had meditation sessions that were primarily focused on lowering your anxiety. All right, and there were other factors in there. They wanted you to try to get better sleep, but if you weren't getting better sleep, they had people there to talk to you about how to do something better with that. It was a very controlled environment, and the purpose of that was to show if all these things together will have an impact. Now, there were other things that we're not going to go into today. They had some supplements, some dietary supplements that they were given. So one group got all these things, the other group didn't. And some of them, at least, and I don't know if it was one patient that was, I don't know if this patient was actually even in the study, but he focused on one patient who had some more moderate stage of Alzheimer's, had lots of plaques and tangles on his PET scan. Went through this, and then 18 months later, don't all go jumping up, running for the door and go to find Dr. Cornish just yet, but there was a patient that actually got better. And that's almost been unreported. There are a couple cases out there, but in general, the two groups, the group that had this treatment, and how do you think they got them to eat just this? They gave them no other food. They sent the food to them. They had the food delivered. You could have 3 meals and a couple of snacks. This is what you got. So it was harsh. When you go back and look, God, this is really harsh. But people volunteered for it. And if you had a spouse, your spouse joined you. All right? So, and not all of them, but many of them did. So anyway, but the group that had all this going on, they showed, in general, no worsening, in general, some improvement in their Alzheimer's. And they did that by testing. Some of them showed it on their PET scans that they were better. So this is one of the first studies that's really shown at least some hope for improvements, okay? The other group and this was 20 weeks was the length of the study. So after 20 weeks, they did all these things again, these tests. The group that did not get treatment, they showed progression of their illness. pretty much uniformly. Okay? Now, the other thing about these studies is that there's some overlap. Some people did just as, in the non-treatment group, did just as well as the people in the treatment group, but most of the treatment group did better than most of the people in the non-treatment group. All right. And it's a small number, which is the real downside. So 25 people is not proof in either side of it, but it's sort of encouraging. It's actually not the only. There was somebody who did this actually about 10 years ago who found the same thing. It just never quite got the same level of interest. So this is important, and it's not just this one study that tells you that, but this makes a difference. Okay. Other questions? Okay.
Just out of curiosity.
No, that's it. Your time is passed.
Gotta be careful.
No, please. Oh, come on. Oh, God, please.
Just out of curiosity, you've got the two groups.
Mhm.
Now, did they check to make sure these people were all eating all this stuff? Or it was just, okay, now we've got this group, and for all you know, someone in the control group was eating pretty healthy anyway?
And that's a real good question. They at least attempted to address all of these things, because part of signing up for the study was before you got told which group you're in, you agreed to be in, to do whatever they said in group A or group B, right?
Right.
And the people in group B were not happy they were in group B,
Right.
right? So what and we don't know the results of this part yet, but those people in group B, it's a 20-week study. At the end of 20 weeks, group B was going to be allowed, and we haven't seen the results, to go do group A type things, okay? So that was part of that, and I don't know how, honestly, I can't remember exactly how they confirmed that group B didn't start doing these things. They weren't doing them beforehand.
They were not.
They were not.
Okay.
Okay, so it was pretty much fine. Now, I say these things, I don't believe they were doing any of the things, particularly the supplements, but any of the things that were going on here. So they were just eating their regular diet, which was not limiting sugar, lots of meat. It wasn't vegan, it was, yes.
And do we know what these supplements were? Just general?
I do. Do you want me to tell you? Are you sure?
You want the long list or the short list?
Okay. Well, first of all, supplements are not medicine, right? They're not made by drug companies. The standards of supplements is they're not checked by the FDA in other words. So it's been shown in a lot of cases that sometimes a supplement you think you're getting is not what you're getting. That said, they gave a supplement. They gave a supplement that was a combined form of omega-3s and turmeric with ginger and I think black pepper. Okay, so that was one of the supplements.
Oh, okay.
One supplement. Now, usually, like I went looking, I couldn't find a supplement, but omega-3s you can get omega-3 supplements, fish oil. That's what it's called. And you can get this turmeric, which you can get it in capsule form. I hate to say that I'm taking it, but I am.
It
And
helps with pain.
well, and the big point about that is turmeric is a well-documented anti-inflammatory. And in some tests, it's been just as good as taking a lead, for example. So, all right, and it doesn't really have the side effects maybe that a lead does, that sort of thing. But, so that was one supplement. There was another study, vitamin C supplement, vitamin D supplement. I think there might have even been a B12 supplement, but it was and a multivitamin. Okay, so those aren't too outrageous per se. There were, I can't think of the mushrooms. There was a mushroom supplement. It'll come to me in a second here. It's my memory already too. And then there was a bioactive your gastroenteric biosome supplement or
Is that-
probiotic.
Oh, okay.
I'd come to it sooner or later. I didn't forget. So probiotic and a mushroom supplement called lion's mane.
Yeah.
It's a mushroom.
Mushrooms, lion's mane. is what it's called. So, and all of those stuff like the probiotics, there's a study that says, well, it's might be helpful. Lion's mane, the same thing. Lion's mane actually, supposedly, lion's mane does, but it helps with your alertness and also helps you sleep. I don't believe it for a second, but it might. That's what it's touted to be. But there's also some evidence that it might help you with your risk of cognitive decline. So, and the study was done. I didn't mean to spend all this time on this study, but the study was done looking at the shotgun, what you call a shotgun approach. You throw this kitchen sink at it and hope something happens. So I can't tell you that one supplement was better for this person or that person, or this diet was better for this, I can't tell you, but I can tell you that this diet is better. I can't tell you that exercise is better. I can tell you that turmeric is probably okay. I can tell you that getting fish oil, and they had a fish oil supplement, but they said the equivalent supplement is eating a meal of salmon once a week. Once a week, salmon. So I eat once a week. I eat salmon once a week, guaranteed. So, but because it's the omega-3s, it's not so much for here, but it's for here, oh heck, all of it. So anyways, awesome, love it. So there you go. Yes, sir.
I have a question about eating food that you probably shouldn't eat, whether you're diabetic or whatever. I think it helps my anxiety level to consume some of those things, and I consume a lot of them. I love spaghetti.
Nothing wrong with spaghetti.
Well,
It's a complex carb, at least depending on how you make it.
but the thing are, the ways of doing things that can make up for that. I think, like I say, I think it helps my anxiety factor that I can look at something and eat that anyway. But I do a lot of exercise. So, am I kind of justifying doing that?
Well, and let's remember that none of these things are going to kill or cure, right? Not by themselves. It's really it's probably more of a cumulative, or for a particular individual, that sort of thing. I mean, I chose to give up my potato chips because it was really, I'd sit at television at night and have a bowl of dinner, and not even realize, oh, it's gone. When did I eat that? But that said, first of all, we're not going to eat, I'm not going to ask anybody because I don't do it either, but we're not going to eat things we don't like. The second thing is to give yourself a break sometimes is okay. It's not, that one study was probably without a break, for example. So if I had, if I was in stage 2 of Alzheimer's disease, well, I probably wouldn't be able to make the decision necessarily anyway, but say, I'm doing it all. This is not working, but your current pattern might let you live to be 100 for life.
Handicapped golfer, but a scratch eater.
I have no response to that. and I'm really, I don't want to make anybody feel bad for not doing these things. That's not the role here. Just to help you inform yourself. If you find something else that's just, better yet, just know what you're eating. If you know it, and then you say, well, maybe I could find something else I like, then that would be the way, the way that I would approach it. That's the way I try to approach it. Make sense? Yes?
I don't use the salt shaker at all.
Yeah, I don't either. Right.
I figured you cut it up and everything.
It does.
And same with sugar. I don't sugar in my coffee or my tea. I'm a diet Mountain Dew fan.
Caffeine's pretty good for you, by the way. At least so I'm told. I don't know. I take plenty of caffeine.
It seems like if you start tearing yourself apart about eating this or eating this and not eating this, not eating this, it seems to me like you're going to cause a lot of anxiety
And if that's what it does, literally, if that's what it does, then that's why you don't do it, and that's fair, right? Because anxiety's bad for you too. So I get that. I'm not telling you right or wrong. I'm just, again, saying, maybe you could find something else that you like too, or have less of this and trade it with something else like that. I know the right answer. The right answer is different for everybody. Is that fair? Yeah.
Red wine.
red wine is okay. I partake of some most evenings. Not every evening, most evenings. A glass, good for you. You had a question, or
We were talking about the
red wine? Yeah. Red wine has.
beyond the key elements.
There are some places that it is, and there are some of them are in those blue zones that I talked about. Italy being one of them, and another place where they have it's just a glass of wine with lunch and dinner. I don't know. But anyway, okay. Other questions? I got dizzy. Okay. Y'all get tired listening to me, just tell me to quit. But I'm still going. All right. So, here we go. We talked enough about risk factors. We'll talk about the stages. And the stages we're going to talk about them briefly because this is not a very clear topic, at least not in my mind. And I'm sure as I try to explain it to you, it's not going to get any clearer. But you can look at this slide and see that there's roughly 5 so-called stages of Alzheimer's. Really, there's only 3 of active Alzheimer's. 1 of what you might call early Alzheimer's, and then 1 where the asymptomatic stage that is sort of pre-Alzheimer's. So the pre-Alzheimer's thing, I sort of mentioned briefly, where sometimes, for whatever reason, if you look for it, or you might find that you have plaques on the brain, or you might have some risk, something that says, well, I'm looking at this. You might find it incidentally, but what we do know is that we can see some of the early signs of Alzheimer's on a PET scan as early as the 50s, sometimes even in the 40s in some people, all right? So, and of course you have to track them for 20, 30 years to know if they really develop Alzheimer's, because most Alzheimer's doesn't show up until 65 or greater. Not all, mind you, but most. So I kind of throw that out, but this MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment, all right, due to Alzheimer's disease. And that's really, it's early stage of cognitive ability loss. And we'll talk a little about what that is. But that's the definition. So I can't tell you what features that we're going to go into next exactly defines this stage just yet. Now, all the studies that I sort of reference that look at this do a cognitive test, and there's some arguments in the literature about what's the right cognitive test to do, but they use a cognitive test to help define these stages. All right, I can't tell you the features of the test because they're worse than the old IQ tests that we used to take. They're hours of tests, memory tests, things like that. So, and then this is almost the silliest part. Mild, moderate, and severe disease is mild symptoms, moderate symptoms, and severe symptoms. How about that? Yeah, exactly. So, but just to know that and I think we're really in the process of trying to define what that means. And some of this, and I experienced a lot of this when I was still, working physician, particularly when we're talking about research, is in order to study something, we have to have some parameters of how we're going to categorize the things we're studying. So that's kind of where this comes from. Okay, this is more fun. Not much fun, but this is what you were told you were going to get to hear about. One moment, please. No, I have one. All right, sorry for the delay there. All right, so here's another set of relatively arbitrary but meaningful observations, all right? So what we want to talk about is how do we know if something relates to Alzheimer's or not? So today I couldn't find my keys. Does that mean I have Thank you very much. So, yes, not finding your keys doesn't mean you have Alzheimer's. Forgetting where you left something does not mean you have Alzheimer's. But one of the things is that, and I think, at least I did, and I suspect that most people do, is that I think of Alzheimer's first as memory loss. And it's not just memory loss, which we'll talk about a little bit more here, but it almost always starts as some form of memory loss. At least that's what it seems like. That's one of the first signs, different forms of memory loss. So the memory loss, that you lose things, cannot remember where you put them, that's not so bad, but can't backtrack and find where they were, and can't even think of where to look, or you find them in places like you put your keys in the refrigerator, that starts to get to be a little bit of a question. Doesn't prove anything, but the memory loss that impacts things you do every day, right? You forget how to, let's say you're a cook, and you forget a favorite recipe. Y'all cook most of this stuff here, so I'm not going to ask you if you remembered your recipes, because I could never remember recipes since the time I was 20. But if you have a favorite thing that you used to make, and all of a sudden you find, or the people that you live with, the people that you're feeding, find that you've left something out. That gets to be unusual, okay? Other things that stand out: being told something, or learning, or hearing new information, and not being able to recall it, and asking questions over and over again. Here's an example, family example from my household. Years ago, when my mother was still alive, she and my father had come to visit me and my family. And this is really before we at least the rest of the family knew that this was going on, knew that something was going on. So the boys in the family, I have 3 sons. My father and I, we all went off and went whitewater rafting. My mother stayed behind with my wife, God love her, and we came back, and my wife Pam comes up and says, your mom just seemed so confused. And we didn't see my parents, but 2, 3, 4 times a year maybe. So this was a new insight, of course. And what she was doing was, and she knew we were going on this trip, but she kept coming out of the room they were staying and asking, well, where's my dad's name was Ken. She would ask specifically, where's Ken? Where's Ken? And my wife would tell her, and it wouldn't be 20 minutes later, where's Ken? Where's Ken? That's a feature. That's a clear feature. Repeatedly asking the same question again and again in a very short period of time. So, and that's fairly powerful for that piece of information. So, other things, challenges, yes, sir.
How about going into a room and can't figure out why you went in?
I'm going to say that's because you're distracted. But I do that every day in multiple rooms of my house. I'll tell you, I know why I do it. I do it because I routinely go this way when I'm going to whatever room I'm going to. So, and I meant to go that way, but then I thought, but my body just took me. It's like driving someplace. Like, I drove to work the same way for 35 years, so to speak. And now when I go out to the store or go to to a different store or something like that, I have to consciously make an effort not to go that same way. But the short answer is that's not related to Alzheimer's. Forgetting what you got there for. Now, the question though is, do you know where you are? I mean, and that's another piece of this memory piece. Another piece of this story. So going places and then forgetting where you are. That's a moderate, medium to late finding sometimes, but it can be fairly early also. Or forgetting how to drive to a favorite place. So for example, I know how to drive to work, I know how to drive to the grocery store, getting in your car, going somewhere, and forgetting how to get there. Places that you've gone to a lot. That's problematic, right? Or getting there and forgetting where you are and not knowing how to get back. Those are all features of that same sort of scenario, okay? So confusion with time or place, that's part of that. The challenges in planning or solving problems, how to write up a grocery list, for example, how to how to get your laundry done, simple things like that start to fall apart. Let's see, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. There is a vision piece to this, and it's a little unclear what the biology, so to speak, or physiology is behind that. But we believe it's in the brain, and it's coordinating the images that the eye is seeing into well, you and I see these things, and okay, we don't have to think about it, but suddenly distance and the relationship between the distance between you two, or distance between me and somebody writing something here right next to me, I lose that separation. So spatial relationships. One of the features of this is, I don't know, it's not really something, but hearing can be a problem. Now, hearing in and of itself probably contributes. That's all right. We liked what we were seeing. Loss of hearing can contribute to some of this. All right, so that it can be a cause related to you forgetting how to get to places. It can be a cause for this withdrawal from work or social activities. I know my father had that in his later years. He had a pretty significant hearing problem, wearing a hearing aid. We'd go out to eat at a restaurant, and there was just too much noise in the restaurant. Now, he didn't really have dementia at that time, but it may have contributed to things later on like that. So if we see some of that, the withdrawal from work or social activities, it doesn't mean you have Alzheimer's. It probably means you have to have your hearing checked first and then consider that. Yes?
We're talking about these signs of Alzheimer's.
Yes?
Why is it important to know, for us to know, generally, there's Alzheimer's, and that's part of dementia, but it's a different thing? I mean, why not just call it dementia? Well, I know there is, but
Well, we know a lot more. Well, first of all, we want to know what the type of dementia is. Why do we want to know that? Because each dementia has a different course, a different natural history, you might call it. All right? I don't know if y'all remember.
Personal, but we're the school bus, so we gotta go.
Thank you for coming. So, the importance of that is well, twofold. One, there's a natural history, and for those different dementias, each have a natural history. And we're talking only about Alzheimer's. The natural history of Alzheimer's, we think we might be able to impact on, maybe. All right, I don't know about some of these others, and they occur at different ages, many of them. So there's one kind called frontotemporal dementia. Y'all know who Bruce Willis is?
Yeah.
Yeah, he has that. And he's been, I don't know if you follow any of that news at all, because I don't really, but I think he's actually still living at home, but he's no longer in the public eye, and he has fairly severe dementia. But it's a different dementia, and he's our age. He's 66 or 67, something like that. So anyway, but that's all. And then the reason that we know these things, the reason that we are talking about these things is because if you think that Alzheimer's is becoming an issue, then it becomes time to go talk to somebody, i.e. your doctor probably, or the person's doctor, and say, we're concerned about this. Should we test for this? What should we do? What are our options? That sort of thing, okay? Well, we're not spending a lot of time on that today, but that's really the big purpose of this, is first identifying that this is what's going on, understanding that. And if you're with somebody, a partner, husband, parent, that has many of these signs, or enough of these signs for you to be concerned, then sometime you're going to want to have a conversation with them about, well, what do we do now? We see this going on. Do you see this also? Do you think this is an issue? Many people won't want to know it. Just like many people won't want to know what their genetic makeup is related to this. And nobody has to, but if they're becoming unable to take care of themselves, then it behooves everybody to kind of try to understand why.
so there's just a different treatment, so we want to know that this is the one we're dealing with.
Yeah, yes, and also be able, you really want to be able to talk to, so if I'm taking my mother in, for example, I want to be able to talk to her in the early stages of this to say, this is what's going on, this is what we can expect, do you understand that? And how do we deal with this? When do I start taking over for this, that, or the other thing, your accounts, this or that? When do we take the car keys away? You know, some things like that. I mean, that those things are going to happen, and how do we work together on finding the safest approach for that?
Okay, so you might have those same issues with other dementia, but Alzheimer's just has a different progression, and you want to be aware that that's what you're dealing with.
Yes, yeah, as well as, okay, yeah, that's really it, all right? There's not any really great therapies for it. There are treatments for some of the symptoms, you know, the sleeplessness, maybe agitation, anxiety goes up, depression, those sorts of things can be treated specifically, but they're not necessarily specific for Alzheimer's either. I'm sorry, we have, okay? I'm not sure I can, because I really don't know that much about frontotemporal dementia. So I'm gonna have to leave that one alone.
I don't know, maybe it's just me, I would ask everybody, why do you go to the family doctor? You go in there for a hangout, and every single time you go, they say, have you thought lately? Is that anything to do with this? You know, or, I mean, every time you go to the doctor, see, everybody has, is everybody else good? No one's asking,
But they didn't, because you weren't older. Well, okay, it's not specific, that's not specific for Alzheimer's, because balance is an issue, falling and breaking bones is an issue for people after a certain age, and this is probably most of us in, why do?
Oh, it's bad
Right. Feel bad, everybody has to go through it. It's not even, I mean, okay, it's fine. Yes.
There are things on TV we see,
Please.
focus factor and Prevagen for memory,
I'm sorry?
focus factor and Prevagen and all these things that we see on TV to help with memories. Do they really work? That's just part of.
Unproven.
That's
That's all I have to say about it right now. I mean,
good to know.
yes.
Is it true that your personality or character before you develop Alzheimer's is the way that you're gonna go through Alzheimer's? In other words, if you're like a real assertive, anxiety type person, as opposed to a quiet, sedative type person, is how you're gonna present yourself with Alzheimer's?
I'm not sure that's exactly well documented. One of the parts to deciding this is changes in your personality. So some people with a quiet personality, you're one of those quiet people, right? Okay. So, you know, if you're a quiet personality and suddenly you become, you know, loquacious, and anger, and develop, you know, getting mad for reasons that don't make any sense, then those are so-called changes in personality. Now, keeping the same personality, or approaching to it the same way, that's probably true, but until we get into some later stages, the mood and personality changes usually occur a little later in the disease. All right? So, I'm not sure if that answers your question, because I'm not really sure there is a better answer. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well,
She kind of was the
yeah.
opposite. Okay.
Yeah. So. They go through changes. My mother had an angry stage, and she was the quiet type that you were talking about. So, other things are that about that is that you know, I don't know how many of you are like this, but if you're living by yourself quite frequently, you're very picky about how your house is. Let's just say sort of that. everything's in its place. Some people are very clean, things like that, and over here we're not apparently, but we're gonna ignore some of the outliers. But in any sense, when I say that is a change in that sort of stuff. So, you know, where somebody was religious about keeping their house in clean and perfect order, and all of a sudden your daughter comes over to visit and there's, you know, clothes lying in a pile over here or something like that. They're out of character, right? So it's changes in mood, personality, and really your character. All right. More questions about this? Okay. Are y'all tired yet? No? Y'all staying awake. All right. So we talked about everything here. We didn't talk about the research. That'll probably take me 2 minutes. Maybe it'll take me longer because we already talked about a lot of it. And then and some of the resources that Alzheimer's Association has for us. So I have to talk about FDA-approved treatments. As of right now, there's only really one, and that medicine is called lecanemab or something. I don't know what the other form of it is. Lecanemab. Oh, let's see here. It's spelled, for those who are writing this down, Lecanemab. I'm probably pronouncing it bizarrely, but it's lecanemab. So that drug was approved by the FDA. It's been almost a year ago now, I think. And the study that allowed them to approve that took, I honestly can't remember how many patients it was, but they did what I talked about, split people into two different groups, right? One group got the medicine, the other group didn't. And what they discovered, and this was an 18-month study, and I guess they did memory or mental acuity tests or whatever they call them there, cognitive tests at the beginning of the study for everybody. They all fit into the mild or the MCI group, the mild cognitive impairment, or the stage 1 group, however they do that, and then they started them on the medicine. So both groups started at the same stage, theoretically. And then 18 months later, they tested where they were. The group that did not get the medicine showed a steady state of decline, pretty much uniformly, over those 18 months. So their test results were worse, all right? The group that got the medicine did about 5 or 6 months better. So, and they actually did these tests periodically throughout the study. But so the group that got the medicine, the suggestion was that the rate of decline slowed, all right? That's it. That's as good as it gets. That's the medicine, the only medicine out there that's really showing any benefit. And I'm going to talk offline for a second, and I'm going to say that I honestly not sure I even trust that, because the numbers were small, and the medicine has some side effects. We talked about the APO gene, right? The APO gene number 4. This didn't seem to matter if you had one of those genes, but if you had both of those genes, which a couple did in the study, there was a scary high incidence of bleeding in the brain. So there you go, scary. So you'd have to be genetically tested before you took this, because you're not a candidate if you have these two genes. All right. And unfortunately, I'll tell you right up front, I'm biased about it because it was about, let's see, what was 2018? It's about a good 10 years ago, maybe 12. There's a drug called Aricept. Maybe you've all heard of that or ran into that. Well, it was actually at the time touted to do the same thing. And that study told us that 40% of the patients that got the drug did better. The second group had what's called a placebo. So everybody got a medicine, so to speak, got a placebo. 20% of the group that got the placebo got better over this time period. Yeah, exactly. Now you go, what? So how does that work? Well, it works because the study and the tests were not very powerful, meaning that they weren't telling us what we thought they were telling us. The drug was started that way, then it became a treatment more for some of the symptoms, but it just makes me skeptical because the change is very small. When I first read the Aricept studies, was shortly after my mother was diagnosed, and we did treat her with we did give her the Aricept. It was available, so I don't know what else to do, but I can't honestly tell if it had an effect or not. She lived 6 years beyond the diagnosis, and she took Aricept for at least 2 or 3 years. So anyway, but look, Canamab has been documented at least to show this. It works on just those amyloid plaques, not the tangles, the plaques, and it makes it a little unclear whether or not it's really going to have an effect in the broader population or not. And the risk factors make me a little leery about it. It's not to say, that somebody would not choose to use it, but it's out there. And that's really the only thing they've got out there. I think they're coming out with a second form of it here soon. It may already be out. But there are no other medications. There are medications to treat the symptoms, some of the symptoms, but not the memory loss. So, but if you want to learn more about it, it's up there on the screen. Go to the Alzheimer's organization. They might give you a different tale. The community that studies this, meaning the medical community, seems to be very excited about it, and I sort of get that because it's probably the first thing that's really medicine that's shown an impact. But the things that I talked about earlier, the preventions, the risk lowerers, for example, seem to be as easily as powerful as this late treatment in terms of at least prevention. Now, they didn't really look at this for prevention. I don't know if it would be useful or not. So that's what we know about medications and FDA treatments. FDA. Questions? Yeah.
Also, another medication that was given is NAMENDA.
Amenda or Namid? I can't remember. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or,
This was years ago you're talking about.
well,
This isn't brand new.
within the last 10 years.
Yeah, okay, right. That was another one. It's sort of same sort of concept. It was actually added to Aricept sometimes. And I will tell you that we did that one too. It didn't, and I honestly don't remember very much about that medicine to tell you, but it's not really meant to treat or make the disease itself change in some way. More treat some of the symptoms. That's the best way I can put that. Does that make sense? Yes, in the back.
Talking with our neurologist, she knows all about the 6-month benefit of some new medicine.
Yes, yeah.
But she doesn't know anything about some of the negatives that are showing up after 6 months. And
Well,
they're still studying that, trying to decide what.
yeah, that's exactly right. So,
Some of it's not good.
is there a longer term benefit? But the bleeding is the thing that hasn't made a lot of press, but it's there. I mean, it's known. You can have that bleeding even if you don't have both of those genes, for example. It's a pretty low risk, apparently. I mean, I think it was 1% or less had that happen, but again, that's a bad thing. It's probably worse than having Alzheimer's, but I don't know. Anyway, so that's yes, sir.
The neurologist definitely.
Yeah, right.
No, I was just gonna ask, would Alzheimer's increase anxiety in an individual?
Can, yeah,
So you just treat the anxiety?
usually. How's that for a short answer? But yes and yes.
Somebody that's got Alzheimer's, I've got both a parent and now my sister. Each of them have had a strong desire to go home, so to speak.
Oh my
If I
goodness,
find
absolutely.
Dad,
Oh, yeah.
walking from here.
Yeah.
Where was
Yeah.
he heading? He's headed home to Ohio. My sister, who
Well,
was down in
yeah.
Florida, she's trying to constantly come back up. I find that an unusual,
It's not unusual. In fact, it's probably common.
difficult is for my brother.
Right. Well, I'm sure you've all heard stories of somebody walks out the door and they get found miles away, or they're lost. You'll see this gray alert on the, we're looking for the, that sort of thing. So what you're talking about is common. My mother did the same thing. And it happens more and more. Well, two things happen. One is they sundown. It happens. You know what sundown is? The symptoms become more apparent in the evenings. All right? More forgetful, more confused. The confusion part seems to ramp up in the evenings. And there was a second piece to that, but now I already forgot it. Anyway, so that's sundown is one thing. The confusion part, that's a pretty constant finding. Well, I don't have a list up there anymore, but confusion about time and place. So they forget, they don't know where they're at. I hate to talk them like they, but a person with Alzheimer's may not know where they're at, and then they go, their memory doesn't, they don't have the short-term memory to help them with that, or how they got there. So they go back to, they remember things from long ago.
So they're trying to return to
Yeah.
something they know.
Yep, there you go. Yes?
What is the time from the diagnosis to, like, is there a median time?
The median time is about 8 years, 6 to 8 years. Some people live 20, some people live less. Yeah. Yeah, my mother lived, I think it was 6 years.
So the median is around.
Around 6 to 8 years, yeah.
Counting funny story?
No. I'm just kidding, I like to laugh, let's go.
My mother was in assisted living, and they have a ankle bracelet thing that if she went
Yeah.
out the door would go off. Well, she was resourceful enough to want to leave, that she would steal the scissors off the nurse's cart and cut it off. And she did it more than once. She did a lot of funny things.
The place is not, just tell you personal experience, my mother was in actually a lockdown facility where you had to know the code to get out the door, kind of thing. So, there you go. But, yes?
Two things, in your, you had information about, the disease. What would you say the 3 top things we can do to change our probability of getting?
Risk factors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, change your risk. Yeah, can't remember? So.
3 top things.
3 top things. I would say 3 top things are take care of your the medical issues up there, whatever they are. If it's hypertension, it's diabetes, if it's cholesterol, if it's kidney disease, whatever. Take care of your medical issues. Anything that improves your, or affects your circulation, or affects your heart, affects your brain equally as much. All right? That's number 1. Number 2, and these also know this, but I'm an exercise believer. And in fact, there's not been one study that has suggested that exercise is bad in any way, right? And it's definitely good for your brain. No matter what you have. Right, like now, you may not be able to do the exercise. So for example, I have horrifically bad arthritis. I can't play tennis anymore. That was my love for 30 years. But I'm working around it. I'm trying it. But so, and it is, you have to find, really, the truth about exercise, you have to find something you enjoy, or you won't do that either. It's like eating, right? And the third thing, to me, is eating right. Somebody talked about won't give up their potato chips or something like that. I can't remember who that was, but okay. But those sorts of things, like, and it's not listed well up there, but think that are processed or ultra processed foods, which means they don't look anything like what they started out to be. Potato chips don't look anything like potatoes. Well, they're full of grease. So there's those sorts of things. So dietary changes that you can make that you enjoy. That's my opinion. The rest of the things are important, but eat salmon. There you go. Yeah, I bet you don't.
And one last
Yeah.
thing, it's just an observation. Tell me about the logo. The Alzheimer's logo. You had it on all your slides.
Oh, the 2 little head things.
I'll remember that.
All right. Let me see.
Maybe if,
That's the M2. Well, is it on that slide?
No, it's down the bottom left. There it is.
Was it on there?
Yes.
It'll come up here too.
There.
Oh, that. It looks like a head, and the other one's upside down, but I don't know.
Okay.
I can see how you think that. I don't know. I don't know what the logo means, stands
Somebody had an idea that.
for, or where it came from.
Remind you of it,
Yeah, and before we sort of wrap it up, and I'm willing to stay for more questions, I don't want to keep everybody here necessarily, but, did y'all got at least a handout that has some numbers to call?
Yeah, on the back of this.
on the back of those things, numbers to call for help, for information. The organization has a beautiful 24-hour, 7-day-a-week number you can call for anything. I'll give you some. Oh, sorry. Here we go. So the organization, there we go. The helpline, which will help you with anything, right? And then you can go on their website and look up anything. Same thing. In fact, you can find the numbers on the website. And then you can go on the website and find out what sort of things are in your community. And the last thing I'll make a pitch for is,
There's also a lot of, people that are caregivers that have support groups.
yes, in community support groups. Yes, and you can find some of them through this. You can actually find them on, I hesitate to say the F word, but Facebook has an Alzheimer's group, or a series of Alzheimer's groups, or whatever social media you want to get on. But the Alzheimer's Association has some that are probably the best organized.
And so
Yeah.
you want us to walk, right?
I want you to walk.
Get
We
it
didn't
on.
talk about how much, but you'll get your 7,000 steps in. This walk, unfortunately, for this year, I think is over. I think it was this summer. But it comes every year, sorry, so you're excused for now. But next year, I got your name, I'm gonna get you.
I think it's October sixth.
Oh, if it's October 6th, I'm wrong.
I don't know.
Oh, I'm bad. I should know that. Okay, well, if anybody's interested in going to walk for Alzheimer's, then call this number and find out when it is and where. And last but not least, I think that's it.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's enough for now.